Miss Carrillo. This side. Hi.
Hi, other side. Newton.
Recording in progress.
Us for the Development and Services Committee meeting. We do not currently have a quorum, but we anticipate having one in just a few moments, and we'll call the meeting to order at that time. So those of you who know that I'm going to be asking you questions can prepare. you ready for
Thank
me
you
to
all
call?
and apologies. And I'm glad that we have the Zoom option.
Ms. Teresa, thank you for joining us. We are still waiting to achieve our quorum. Are you also planning on joining us in person, or will you be participating via Zoom for the entire meeting?
I am en route to be there in person.
Perfect. Well, we will have our quorum when you arrive. Madam Clerk, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
You now have a quorum. And I call the Development and Services Committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
You? Teratio?
Here.
Barron?
Here.
English?
Present.
Newton?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Perfect. The next item of business is item 2, the approval of the minutes. I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve?
Second.
Been moved and properly seconded. Would you call for the vote, please?
Yes.
Barron?
Yes.
English?
Yes.
Newton?
Yes.
Motion approved.
The third item of business is the adoption of the agenda. Are there any changes, additions, or deletions?
No changes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any changes from the committee? With that, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second?
And moved and properly seconded to approve the agenda. Will you please call for the vote?
Teratio?
Yes.
Barron?
Yes.
English?
Yes.
Newton?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. I have 3 items for action and several items for pending analysis. Item 4A is from Economic Development for the partial closure of Locklear Road. Mr. Mr. Administrator, I can promote you. Mr. Administrator, would you like to address this or have a member of your staff address it?
Yes, ma'am. Just very briefly, I'll address it under the strategic and general discussion, which I'm showing to be on page 10 of your packet in the electronic version. If you look down where it talks about public works request to close this portion of the road, and they list multiple reasons, 1 through 5. Just want to draw your attention to that before we have the staff address any other information. But it says, the narrow width of the existing road makes it almost impossible for two-way traffic to pass. The washed out culvert makes it impossible for travel along the entire length of the road. The existing dirt portion does not currently serve any residences or businesses. The existing road splits the property in half, which is undesirable for interested industries. And then for any industry that chooses to build on the property, their access points would be in Blythewood Road and a community road, canceling the need for the dirt portion of Locklear Road to remain. So for all those reasons and additional ones that staff may want to address before the committee, staff is recommending the approval to start this road closure process.
Thank you. And Mr. Brown, just to expand on your last sentence, that what you're asking is to begin the process. So our vote today, if it were in the affirmative going to council, doesn't close the road, but rather it begins the legal process as dictated by our ordinances to start.
That's correct. And I'll have the county attorney expound if you will.
Right, Madam Chair. Yes, there's actually a legal process by state law that's required, so it will have to go to circuit court. But yes, what today is just for county council to give the approval to start the process.
Thank you. Does any member of the committee need someone from the staff to come to present, or is there someone who'd like to make a motion?
Move to approve. Second.
Been moved and properly seconded to approve item 4A, the partial closure of Locklear Road. Will you call for the vote, please?
Teratio?
Yes.
Barron?
Yes.
English?
Yes.
Newton?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Mr. Davis, you, sir, will not have it so easy. That brings us to item 4B for utilities, the Southeast Sewer Master Plan. Mr. Administrator, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, ma'am. Just briefly before I allow Mr. Davis to continue. So first of all, I wanted to communicate that this is a continuation of a process. So previously, the county had gone through a process with a previous vendor to look at a master plan. Phase 1 came out of that, and that has been completed. Richland County Utilities now is asking for a concept plan for the committee to review that and say, yes, we think that concept makes sense. And for us to then be allowed to engage the consultant, which is listed here as AECOM to complete the Southeast Sewer Master Plan. The funding for this is already in the budget for the department. So it's not a request of any additional funds. All that's contained within the department's budget. Right, what's happening right now is, as the briefing document communicates, and I have Mr. Davis talk to that more specifically, is this would allow for the development of a plan that communicates what the county intends to do in terms of creating access to sewer infrastructure that currently does not exist to connect various individuals to. So, and we can talk more about that in detail, and I'll have Mr. Davis do that, Ms. Newton, but those 2 points, no funding being requested, and right now we're asking for you all to consider whether or not you want to move forward with this concept, which would then turn into an actual master plan.
Thank you. And following up on that, this is based on the initial 3 phases that were approved by council in 2018. And then this plan would address the development of those 2 phases that were previously approved, but also provide a long-range vision for what our infrastructure could look like in the area?
Yes, ma'am. And one of the reasons why we did this, you might say, well, Mr. Brown, don't do this, but technically the council previously kind of approved a large version. So we really could be moving forward with this, but I felt as though based off what we've learned with our working groups, let's make sure the current body is aware of what's going on and wants to proceed. Thus, let's bring this to the committee council process. And so that's why this is before you, even though there's been some previous action. I thought it wise, and working with the team, they agreed that we allow this body to address how we move forward. So the concept would allow you to say yay or nay. And then from there, either modify or go with, and then develop the actual master plan from that.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Davis? I'm sorry, would you like any of your staff to speak to this, Mr. Brown?
So I think Mr. Davis is requested, and everybody knows when it comes to water, you need to have Mr. Davis on your team. So, Mr. Davis.
I'm number 1 in the.
No.
On the mic. Okay, I got it. Now you can hear me.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. So I think Mr. Brown did a good job teeing you up. And we'll let you briefly go over this request and then allow the body to ask any questions.
Yes, Madam Chair. I thank you, first of all, for letting me be here. And I don't really like to bring things before you that aren't well thought out. So this is not something that we've thought about for the first time. I've been thinking about it since I've been here. And I wanted to start out with this opening statement. First of all, we want your review and approval of this process, because we don't want to expend funds on something that the council doesn't desire to do. And we've been working pretty closely with Ms. English. I know you and I have talked some, but trying to figure out what we're going to do to align ourselves with the comprehensive plan of the county, and working with Mr. Jensen and other staff from Development Services, as well as the tourism plan for the area down there. And also just looking at trying to find a way to provide for future industries. So with that being said, I do want to say that in the Northwest section, and this is not a criticism, this is just something that's historically true, that the developers have driven the development of our sewer system in such a way that it's limited, and those limitations are causing long-term problems. So it's time for us to take back the control and planning of our system so that we can try to create something that's going to be sustainable and resilient and last for the long term, which is, if you look at, I'll go through some of these details, but the most important part of the master plan is that there's a 3 to 5 year plan, which is the short-term projects. And I know you all know as well as I do, I've been here almost 3 years now, and we just finished the Southeast project, which started a little bit before I got here. So a real detailed project lasts somewhere between 3 and 5 years, depending on how the complexity of that project. So you may see, yeah, we want to do a wastewater treatment plant, but that's going to take 3 years. And so that's the timeline of doing a plan, doing a preliminary engineering report, doing a design plan, getting property, getting easements, getting assets lined up, sizing everything, and then bidding it out for a construction. So that's the long process. So what I did want to say is phase one, if you look at this first sentence, I wanted to go into a little more detail than I did in this briefing document. So phase one is providing for the transfer area customers to be connected to our wastewater treatment plant. It's also closed 3 school failing wastewater systems and the McIntyre wastewater system that was also in trouble, regulatory issues. And I think the long-term goal of our whole plan is to align ourselves with DHEC, the Department of Health and Environmental Control, to align ourselves with protecting the environment and our waterways. That's what we want to do. And closing all these smaller wastewater treatment facilities is a way of doing that. And there's still more that we would like to close. There's several, I won't name names right now because we're still in the negotiation phase with several of these smaller wastewater plants. But as you see throughout this plan, you know, we're looking at how can we grow from a standpoint of taking these other wastewater treatment plants and putting them into our system when we've really got not a lot of capacity. So if you looked at the summary of what we have here, we've got a really, you'll see the presentation. I guess we're going to put that up. Is that going to come up at some point? I'll go through that when we go to the presentation. I'm going to show you where we're limited. She'll get it called up, and I'll go through that very quickly. But I got one closing statement, but I wanted to point out a couple of things. So, you know, AECOM, this process is going to cost about $77,000 total. We've already got some of it kind of laid out. They helped me lay out some of the original concepts that we worked with Ms. English and Development Services staff on. And now we don't want to spend the remaining dollars until we get this approval. So that's the ultimate goal, is to get approval of this body to move forward with the plan, or for this body to say what they want to do instead of the concept plan, or for this body to tell us that we want to stand still. And those are the 3 outcomes. And we are obviously asking for approval. So here's the master plan. If you look at the screen, this will be very brief. It won't be 23 minutes like it was last time I gave this presentation. So I promise you that.
A 5.
A 5, yeah. All right, let's go through. So here, I won't go through, skip that one. Here we go. So very quickly, you see 2020 Hampton, and this is something I love to show because the council graciously approved our budget last year for some additional staff, and that staff was to be able to expand that hour. We're going from one place to the other. It takes an hour, and we didn't have adequate staff to maintain the system. And so we did get staff added. We're still hiring. We're roughly about 90% staffed at this point. And we're doing a really good job bringing people on. So I think that's something that's helped us a lot. So next slide, please. There we go. So this is just the history. You've already mentioned that, Ms. Newton, and I'll just skip that. The project, as we said, you know, phase 1 is complete. We do have the closure plans are out for bid right now, and that should come soon. So we'll be probably bidding that in a week or so. We should get an award right after that to get those closed up. They're not being used. They're still there. So next. Looking at just very quickly, these, I won't go through each of these, but these are projects that we already have identified that we need to do. The wastewater treatment plant is the biggest area for us to consider, because without additional treatment capacity, we're kind of at a standstill with regard to current projected flows. So next, please. So here's where you can kind of see where we are with respect to being, you know, the Garners Ferry Road pump station is very large, and Franklin Park's one we took over, and Gaston pump station is the biggest pump station we have. All of those are pretty much at capacity. And what that means is we are limited to taking only like individual or case by case flow into those systems because they are pretty close to maxed out. And I'll show you why. Next slide. So I like the malfunction junction reference because it's very relative at this very point. There's a lot of traffic issues. I have to go that way to go home. and to come back to work. So I see this every day. So I understand the concept of what I'm trying to say here. So when it comes to Gadsden Pump Station, we are 100% on the green. That means we've already realized the flow. So we're at 100%. So we can't take any more flow at Gadsden. Everything comes to Gadsden. So it's limiting. That's why we've asked, I'll show you another project, but we've asked for a 24-inch line to go from Gadsden to the wastewater treatment plant, because that will allow us to increase capacity at Gadsden. So if you look up at the top, you'll see the Garners Ferry transfer area, Garners Ferry Road, Lower Richland. We've got a 50% realized flow, and 49% of that flow is promised to these subdivisions that are in the works at this time and already have been issued a willingness to serve letter. So yellow represents a letter of willingness to serve has been issued. So those are not realized, but promised or approved. So the Franklin Park pump station right there in the middle, that one's at 88% realized flow. And then down at the treatment plant, you'll see we still seem to have plenty of capacity, but when you look at what's promised, we've got 43% of that is promised and it's not realized yet, but we can't give out. It's like we're having a check that hadn't been cashed. So that's what that is. The capacity assurance program has helped us with that. So next slide, please. This was what was approved in 2018, and we are very close to this plan, except for it uses a lot of pressure pipe, which is not really something that we should be aiming for. We should aim for gravity sewer, because we can be more resilient and more sustainable and use less power and reduce our carbon footprint significantly if we regionalize pump stations and not have so many pump stations that are subject to failure with regard to electrical outages and flooding, which we've seen intensive down there as of this week. So 7 inches of rain in Eastover this week, that really caused a lot of grief. So next slide, please. So again, what we're asking is to allow us to move the engineer forward so that we can actually get the plan, so that we can start acting on the plan and developing projects that relate to the phase 2 and 3. 3 is the treatment plant. So it's pretty much defined already. So next. This is the concept plan. And if you see the green arrows, those are lines that run by gravity. And what the long-term benefit of these would be, we would eliminate the Garners Ferry Road pump station and several other major pump stations, perhaps even including Green Lakes in the long-term future, would go into these gravity lines, which would alleviate a lot of pump stations along the way. And so that would be desirable on multiple levels for sustainability and protection of the environment. So next. These are the quick projects that I just talked about. The 24-inch force main is something that's got to come in right at the beginning. The treatment plant expansion, we've already got a SKIP grant that's been applied for. We're looking to hear back from that. We asked for $10 million. We are hoping to get somewhere between 4 and 6 based on the numbers we've seen so far. We would love to get 10 because the treatment plant is going to cost more than 10. So we're looking for that. That should come out in the next few weeks. And there's a lot of little smaller plans. I know Albean Park has been talked about. Other projects have been mentioned that would be something we'd be looking for grant money for because of the cost of the project versus the people that it's impacting. And that's something even the grant people look at, is how many people are impacted by the grant. So the Southeast Master Plan, we're looking to get that done so we can get these projects further defined. Having a concept plan is a lot different than having a design plan. So it takes about a year to do a design plan. So that's kind of what would happen if we don't do it. Well, we're going to limit ourselves, and our capacity is already gone. It's already been promised out. Now, if some people don't build, or some people don't go through with their willingness to serve letter, then we would get that capacity back, because we did put an expiration date on that so that it would expire over time so we can take it back and it won't be stuck out there forever. I know that was something that was a concern early on. We made sure we put that timeline in there. The long-term moratoriums, that's something that's going to affect us on the economic development side, with people trying to come in and not having a plan. As I know everyone has been following Scout Motors very closely, right? And I saw a lot of y'all in the pictures look great out there. That's in my area. So I think that's a great thing. And believe it or not, I was working on those lines for the city of Columbia 10 years ago. In 2010 and 2007, I worked on the plans for those water lines that are going to supply Scout Motors. So here we're talking 13, 14, 15 years later, they're realizing this major impact. So that tells you how long it sometimes takes to get that money back, you know, from those assets that you invest in. And investing in those assets is going to provide for our community, and it's going to provide jobs and a higher cost of living. This is something that we're looking for in our strategic plan, I believe.
You don't want a higher cost of living.
No, I mean, higher pay is what I mean.
All right, thank
Sorry.
you.
My bad, sorry. So also the other aspect of regulatory issues is with limitations in a system. When you do have a failure, sometimes those environmental things are a lot more impactful because if you don't have backups and redundancies, those are things that affect you very bad. So next slide, please. Okay.
We don't have any.
Okay.
So before I open up the floor to my colleagues, so again, what we're being asked to approve is the creation of a master plan, which would allow you to proactively look and say, this is how we could achieve the plans that council previously approved. This is looking ahead, how we can prepare for economic development and other needs, and also prepare for greater reliability with redundancies, et cetera. So this is the creation of a plan. Is that correct?
And that plan would come back before this body.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Councilwoman Barron, you're recognized.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Davis. So I just want to officially say on the record, because I had a conversation with one of my constituents about another master plan. And she called me to say, hey, I found this master plan from 2007 and y'all hadn't done anything in this book. So I just, I want everyone to know who may be listening today or later that it's a master plan. And just because we put it together doesn't necessarily mean that all the things that are in the plan will be implemented. It's just somewhat of a guide to help us move forward. Should we need to do X, Y, Z, we already have planned it out.
Yes, ma'am. We always have an out with a master plan. I think, it's also the vision. Master plan is in a way a vision of future for 20 years in the future. And a vision is something you aspire to do at that time. And sometimes that vision may change, but I think you've got a different person at the helm now. I'm not saying anybody that was here before is bad. I'm just saying I'm a visionary and I want to bring it. So I'm going to give you the best that I can. And I think that you'll see me being very dedicated to the county and putting a plan together that I believe in and that I would want if it was mine. So.
Councilwoman English, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam. Mr. Davis, first of all, thank you for the last 2+ years of working with me, getting me to understand sewer and poop like I've never understood before.
She has a new respect for poop emoji.
I have such an appreciation. And you know me, I'm visionary as well. But with the breach that we had yesterday, and you know me, spiral welding is in my district. And one of the things that they were saying is that they have in their pipes where they can put notifications. Well, we have that in the new plan going forward, so you guys won't have to dig 70 miles of dirt just to find a problem. Can we put that in there? Is that something we can do?
That's something we certainly can explore. And I think, as with anything, having more instrumentation. I know I can speak from an automotive standpoint. I used to be able to work on a car. I can't really do it now. The more electronics you have, the more dependence you have. But I think in the future, automated intelligence, artificial intelligence is going to be so much more important. And so having that pressurized indication would be fairly easy to implement. And I think, we talked about it even yesterday as we were addressing that issue. And I think we need more automation so that we can read things remotely. And that's something that I really want to see. And so I would say that definitely yes, but it probably won't happen very quickly. We'll probably add a few here and there so that we can, in the critical, we've got to go through a risk assessment and find out what's the most critical for us to know and have those alarms. So.
I'm all for that. So whenever you start, you have my blessing with that, because I think that would be wonderful. And like I said, spiral welding is else. So
Yes, ma'am. So the reason we knew yesterday at 3 a.m. that the water system was in issue was we had some remote sensors on the tank, and the tank was able to tell us in the middle of the night that we had an issue. And so that's when we responded at 4 a.m.
Thank you. And I know that we are rapidly approaching the end of our time, but Councilwoman English, I know that you have been in conversations with utilities for a long time about this, and that most of the phase 2 and phase 3 are in your district. Is there anything else that you'd like to say for the benefit of your colleagues about the master plan? Not to put you on the spot.
that's okay. It's something I believe in infrastructure, and it's just like Mr. Davis has said, you know, this is going into the future. This is beyond me by the time we're gone and other people are coming on 10, 15, 20 years later. That infrastructure needs to be in place to support whatever is coming. And I just agree with that. Infrastructure.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And then we just have one last question from Councilwoman Teresa.
Thank you. I'll just be quick. You were just talking about, came up as you were talking, so I tried to take a note, but I don't know if I got everything. So you mentioned that gravity sewer is preferable, but that we had not planned for that entirety. Is there reason for that, or should we be aiming higher?
We should, and
Okay.
I agree with you. You're singing my song. So I did work, with you on that climate resiliency, Columbia climate resiliency, and the topic of my talk was, let's not let developers drive us down the easy path. Let's create systems that are resilient. And gravity systems, I actually have my presentation from the Climate Ready Columbia, and I talked about the advantages and disadvantages of gravity and pressure. And one of the things the reasons you do, that people want to do the pressure versus the gravity, is because they can get a quick easement going down the road and put a force main and a pressure pipe. And then you end up with what I call this hodgepodge of pressure pipes all connected. And then when one of them fails, it's just like we saw yesterday. We get a tap, somebody taps it wrong. This is the ultimate reason why the water system failed yesterday. Somebody improperly connected a saddle tap on a water connection, and it cracked the pipe all the way up and burst an 8-inch line. And that's what happened. So when that happens on a sewer line, it's a lot more of a bad effect on the environment, because of the sewer is not acceptable. But water is, something that would happen. So it wouldn't be a problem on the environment. But
So did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you for that explanation. And I look forward to further conversations about this in the future.
There will be more conversations. With that, if there are no other questions, Ms. Teresa, if there are no other questions for Mr. Davis, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to
Forward
approve.
this, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I move to forward this on to council. Move to approve.
Second.
Been moved and properly seconded. Will you call for the vote, please?
Rachel, Barron,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
That brings us to item 4C for action, Department of Public Works Traffic Calming Policy Update. Mr. Brown, would you like to address this?
Yes, ma'am. Just very briefly, and we'll have the team who's here address any detailed questions you may have. If you look at, I believe it's page 32 of the electronic document, the staff is really requesting that the county traffic calming policy be accepted as revised. And if you look under strategic and generative, it talks about, based on the overwhelming number of requests received and a small percentage of requests that meet all criteria for installation of traffic calming devices, staff recommends adjusting the policy to reflect the need for neighborhood support prior to a traffic study being performed. The policy change reorganizes the process so that after staff provides an initial review, the neighborhood must sign on to the traffic calming. Then the staff conducts the traffic study to make the final determination of feasibility. Then it goes on to just provide additional information, but under that next line, it talks about staff has recommended a clear process for vetting projects, including establishing facility priorities and determining financial resources aligning with the improvement plan. the reorganization of this process will achieve the desired result in this alignment of the needs to the funds. So again, what you have is, and many of you may get these calls about the need for some traffic calming in the neighborhood. And then we find out that sometimes the criteria are not there that the staff needs. And so it just it's kind of an out of order process. And so the staff is trying to get in front of that so that this is something that's really developed as you look at the neighborhoods on the front end rather than staff coming in on the back end through this process. So that's the general information. Certainly we have DPW staff available to address this specifically, but that's why they're requesting a revised version of this policy to be approved.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And may I also ask, looking as we are barreling towards the time for the ANF meeting, is this a time-sensitive item?
I don't know if it's time sensitive from our standpoint. I think that because of what it's normally being requested of the staff, I think the sooner it can be addressed, the better. But Director Maloney or Engineer Fuller, did you want to provide clarity as to whether or not you feel like this is something that is time sensitive in some respect?
Good evening. No, ma'am, I don't believe it's necessarily time sensitive. We do have a fairly long backlog. So what we're looking to do is kind of rearrange the sequence to cut that down. Right now, we stay in between a 9 to 10 month range for the backlog.
Thank you. There's not a week that goes by that someone doesn't talk to me about traffic calming. While you have the floor, are there any questions that my colleagues want to ask at this time? Ms. Teresa, you were touching your mic. I don't know if that was.
I think that if this is not a time sensitive matter, I think I would like to take my time with this a little bit. I know most of the neighborhoods that I serve are not particularly affected, but I, like Ms. Newton, get lots and lots and lots of contact about traffic calming.
So if I may, I know from our friends at the Sheriff's Department that speeding is the absolute #1 complaint that the Sheriff's Department gets. And so we want to absolutely address this issue and see what we can do to make things safer for our residents and also to not have such a dreadfully long backlog. So just given where we are with time, and unfortunately starting our meeting a little bit late today, I think that the better part of valor might be to keep this item in committee. But I would like to make one request for when this comes back before us. And I don't know if there are other things that colleagues want to have you investigate before you come back. For me, when an ordinance, policy, whatever is being requested to be updated, it's always helpful for me to see a red line or to understand what is being changed. If it's a new policy, then it doesn't matter. But if this is an update, I would respectfully request that we have a clean version, but that we also see a markup because that can also guide our questions. And you answered my question about the current backlog already. Are there any other questions that someone would like to leave with staff for the next time this comes before us? All right. Hearing none. Yes, Ms. Fuller.
Can I address that real quickly?
Please.
As far as we know, we did some research and we couldn't find where a policy was ever adopted by county council. So
works.
this is what we would refer to as an internal, I guess, policy within the department. So this is what we've been following for at least the last 2 years. And through transparency, we would like to make it open to the public and for county council to adopt it as our standard policy.
Thank you. That helps a lot. It's just that sometimes I was hearing it as being revised. And so when it's revised, I just wanted to know where it came from. But I appreciate this. It was a very thorough document. I had no idea that there were this many kinds of traffic calming devices. I feel myself much better informed. So, Mr. Wright, do I need a motion to keep this in committee since it's an item for action?
Since it's an item for action, I probably would have council vote to whether they want to pass it up to full council or have it stay in committee.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion.
Move to keep in.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. Madam Clerk, will you call for the vote, please?
Ratio,
Yes.
Barron, English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. That brings us to the items that are pending analysis where no action is required. Mr. Brown, if I may say, I really appreciated the presentation of these items in this week's committee, in addition to just having a list saying that, it was being researched and you would come back. I appreciated having the updates that you provided in the documents here. I'm getting to the correct part of my agenda so that we can address those briefly. I know that 2 of the items were related. One moment, please. So we have item 5A for analysis, moving to direct the administrator to conduct a review of the rank, weeds, and vegetation ordinance and recommend any updates that would improve the effectiveness of the ordinance, particularly as it relates to safety, enforcement, and blight reduction. There is an update in our packet that estimates when that item would come back before us. Actually, no, that's something different. Is there anything that staff would like to add, or are there any questions from the body about this item? Hearing none, that brings us to item 5B, directing the administrator to create regulations for the operation of short-term rentals in unincorporated Richland County. The rest of the motion is provided on the screen and in our packet. We also have item 4C, which is related. 5C, pardon me, directing the county administrator to work with staff to ensure that the proposed short-term rental ordinance requires each homeowner who wishes to provide a short-term rental to obtain a business license and pay accommodations taxes. We do have an update in our packet that the Business Service Center is taking the lead. You also have some reference documentation regarding proposed state legislation, as well as a draft ordinance from the City of Columbia to register short-term rentals. Are there any questions for our staff about items 5B or 5C at this time? Then that brings us to our final item for analysis, item 5D, directing the administrator to research and present to council current laws and benefits of enacting impact fees in Richland County. The purpose is to help reduce the tax burden on residents by not having to pay the complete cost of development in Richland County. There is also an update in our packet regarding some of the limitations around impact fees in South Carolina and proposing a path for additional research. Are there any questions that my colleagues have for staff about this motion? Again, I would like to thank you, Mr. Brown, and your staff for providing the additional updates for these items pending analysis. That brings us to item 6 on our agenda, which is adjournment.
Go to adjourn.
It's been moved and properly seconded. Madam Clerk, will you call for the vote, please?
Ratio,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes,
Motion approved.
adjourned.